182.
I currently
And we're talking about the cell theory, okay? And all those molecules that we learned last chapter, we're going to talk about when we talk about cells. Because molecules come together to make up cells. Your cells are made of molecules. So we know that about living things. All living things are made of cells. You're made of cells, that plant is made of cells, a mushroom is made of cells,
Mushroom.
a cat, a dog, all living things are made of cells. So, and we say that the cell is the basic unit of structure. That means it's the smallest thing that can make up a living thing. After you take the cell apart, you no longer have something that's living. The cell is the smallest unit of life. And where do cells come from? They come from other cells. All cells come from pre-existing cells.
What are those cells?
We'll talk about where the first cells came from in a later chapter.
No, I've never eaten.
That's what I did.
Amen.
Here's a microscope, and we've used the microscope already. We're going to look at cells under the microscope coming up really soon.
Like this weekend, you read the
I have a microscope that in my room. So good.
The first cells were discovered by a guy named Robert Hooke.
Like the guy.
Robert Hooke looked
He should have been a captain.
at quark cells under the microscope.
cork.
Quark is what you find in the cell walls of plants. If you take the bark of a tree and look under the bark of a tree and take some of that tissue, cut it really thin, put it under a microscope, you see these cells called quark cells, C-O-R-K, which we're going to take a look at under the microscope here shortly.
Today?
If you look on the top right, page 183, it shows some quark cells. See them right there?
Get me a book. I can put it on here.
Let me see if I have a picture of those. Nope, I do not.
Hey, Graham, stop kicking me, dude.
But do you see on the top of page 183, it looks like little boxes?
Yeah.
See the cells look like little boxes?
Yeah.
When Robert Hooke looked at those, are you on the right page? Come on.
I'm on the right page. He was
Will
looking
you
out.
sit straight?
He was looking out with me. Okay.
Turn. Tuck. There you go. 183.
You're welcome. Man.
The stray comments,
My business.
I'm going to have to go. Okay? If you have a question, raise your hand. All these stray comments back and forth takes away from what I'm trying to do. Understand? Pretty simple. Okay. Those little Hooke looked at those quark cells on the top of page 183. And when he looked at them, they looked like little boxes. Do you see how they look like little boxes?
Yeah.
And he said they look like cells. You know, like a prison cell. That's where the name cell came from. They look like little tiny rooms.
A little bit.
He was actually talking about a monk's room was called a cell. That monks lived in. They lived in little tiny rooms that were just boxes almost. Said, hey, those look like the monk cells. And so that's where the word cell came from. Now, we can get, with the microscopes we have nowadays, we can use them to magnify really high. This is magnified almost 10,000 times, and you can see some little bacterial cells. Bacterial cells are very tiny cells, very basic cells. And these electron microscopes are really incredible tools because they fire, instead of firing visible light at something, they fire electrons. And electrons travel really close together, whereas visible light waves travel further apart. And so what happens is you fire electrons at some small object, and they bounce off the object, go in all directions, and you can kind of tell the shape of the object from how these electrons bounce off of it. It's kind of a technical way. It's hard to explain how it works. But with electron microscopes, you can get 500,000 times magnification. Whereas on our light microscopes, you can only get it about 1,000 times. Many of the pictures that you'll see in the biology book use electron microscopes. Like that one right there. And there's one in your book on top of page 185. That's used what we call a scanning tunneling electron microscope. It's pretty cool. Here's some other microscopes. I took this from the AP Biology book. It's just kind of cool. That's a cell. It's a cheek cell. Do you know what a cheek cell is? From the inside of your cheeks. We're gonna look at some in this lab. You take a toothpick and you scrape the inside of your cheek and you put it on a microscope slide and you look at it. And this is what a cheek cell looks like with what we call a bright field microscope, which are kind of like ours. And here's one stained. And here's one using a differential interference contrast microscope. You can see how it looks different. Here's a phase contrast microscope. A dark field microscope. It's the same cell, just used with a bunch of different types of microscopes. But we're going to look at those cells in our lab with just the regular light microscope. Now, there's two types of cells out there. There's your prokaryotic cell and your eukaryotic cell. And the first type is the prokaryotic cell. It's very simple. Let's hear what he says about that.
Prokaryotic cell. A prokaryotic cell is a microscopic unicellular organism without a nucleus or other membrane-bound organelles.
Okay. Thank you, sir. This is a prokaryotic cell is a simple cell. The word prokaryotic means before the nucleus. It doesn't have a nucleus. A nucleus is a container in the middle of the cell that holds the DNA. Remember the nucleic acid that we studied last chapter? That's often held in the middle of a cell. Let me show you what a cell with a nucleus. Here's a cell with a nucleus. That big container there, that's where the DNA sits, in the nucleus. And the nucleus is often easy to see when you're looking at a cell under a microscope. Let's go back and look at that cheek cell that was stained. Can you see the nucleus in the cheek cell?
Yeah.
It's that right there. There you see it again.
What's that other?
There you see it. There. What's that?
In the stained one, there's two dots.
Right there?
Yeah,
I'm not sure what that is.
Long tumor.
Don't know what it is.
Tumor.
But anyway, the nucleus, the prokaryotic cell doesn't have a nucleus. The reason it's prokaryotic is before the nucleus. These organisms were around first on the earth. They're single celled, they're very tiny. They're all around us. These prokaryotic cells are everywhere. They're living on the surface of your skin. Somebody estimated that there's about 100 million of them in 1 square inch of skin. They're living on your skin. And they eat dead skin. They're covering your body. There are a lot of them inside your body in your large intestine, in your colon. They're called Ecoli Bacteria. And there's about 70 trillion of them in your intestine right now, eating away at the food that you can't digest. Creating gas is a waste product sometimes. Isn't that gross? That's what gas is. That's what farts are. It's carbon dioxide gas created by bacteria living in your intestine.
So if you take a microscope and look at your arm, you can see those
Yeah, you can see
hanging out.
You need an electron microscope because they're really small.
Okay. And they'll move, right?
They don't really move. They're kind of stuck in one spot.
It's kind of like a corn dog with the hair.
We will look at some bacteria under a microscope when we study these things.
When does a corn dog have strength?
So a prokaryotic cell, very simple cell, listen. Very simple cell, very small cell. And they show a picture of one in your book on the bottom of page 185 on the bottom left.
Oh yeah. No, I don't see it.
Bottom left of 185.
Oh, it's right there. It's right here.
Why is it fuzzy?
The fuzziness are little hairs that are on the side of it called fibrii, little bristles that help it to stick to things. That's why they don't fall off of you when you go like that. They're just kind of stuck to the skin with their little hairs.
So if I burned them off.
Now, the eukaryotic cells are very complex, bigger cells with a lot more stuff in them. And eukaryotic means true nucleus. Eu means true, karyo means nucleus. It does have a nucleus. All of your cells are like this. Plant cells are like this. Protist cells, fungus cells. These are organisms that are more complex and came about much later in the history of the Earth. The prokaryotic cells have been around for billions of years. They first came about on the Earth about 3.5 billion years ago and are still there today. You don't see eukaryotic cells on the Earth in the fossil record until less than 1 billion years ago. Something like 0.6 or 0.7 billion years ago. So these are much more recent. And they're much bigger. A prokaryotic cell like the one I showed you before would be about that big compared to a eukaryotic cell.
How big?
They're much smaller.
Is that including your finger?
That big. Again, this is just random comment. It doesn't help the class. So, if you look at a prokaryotic cell, it's also, you see all this is describing, I got this from the AP biology book, but this describes the different things inside a prokaryotic cell. There's a lot less stuff in a prokaryotic cell than in a eukaryotic cell.
Bro, why don't we just use the AP biology book?
There's too much stuff. Your reading would be twice as much each time. And you probably wouldn't want to do that. But I do like to show you some things from it.
Bro, I think it's about to
So,
die.
what we're going to do is, what's that?
I think this is about to die.
That's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to study the parts of a cell this chapter. All the different parts that cells have. And you're going to have to know, in your essay for this chapter is going to be, describe all the parts of, draw a cell. You'll have to draw one. And describe all the parts that are in the cell.
How long does it have to be?
That's your essay. Huh?
250 words?
Yeah, at least
on
250 words.
that? On that?
Yes. And you'll see, you'll be able to write even more than that, thousands of words. So, that's what we're going to go over. So make sure you read the section. This first section is just kind of an introduction. And then tomorrow we're going to get into the plasma membrane, which surrounds the cell. The outside of the cell right here, this kind of blue part right here on the outside, that's called the plasma membrane. And we'll discuss what that's made of tomorrow. What we're going to do for the rest of today, now you can turn it off.
Bye-bye.
What we're going to do for the rest of today is look at quartic cells under the microscope.